Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you all for being here, either in person or online. I'm going to talk about Marie-Antoinette today and hopefully at once tell you a little bit more than you might already know about her, for those of you who already know about her, and to introduce you to someone who I think is a much more fascinating character than we often give her credit for being. And I'd like to start with her childhood in Vienna, because we of course associate Marie-Antoinette with France, but she is in fact Austrian by birth. She was born in Vienna on the 2nd of November 1755, and she was the 15th of 16 children of her mother, Empress Maria Theresa, or Maria Theresia, as they called her in Austria. She's christened Maria Antonia Josefa Johanna, because the Virgin Mary is the patron of Austria, so you've got to be called Maria something or other. And she's, as I said, the 15th of 16th. One of the courtiers who was close to Maria Theresa bet with her that she would have a son. And of course, Maria Theresa was much more interested in sons than daughters, it must be said. And Maria Theresa said, no, I've been here before. It's going to be a girl, you believe me. And of course, she then gave birth to a girl, at which point the courtier lost his bet, Count Dietrichstein. And when Maria Theresa was first shown her daughter, it's reported that she said, "Poor little thing, I feel so sorry for her. She and I are as alike as 2 drops of water." We'd say 2 peas in a pod, but the image she used was as alike as 2 drops of water. At which point Dietrichstein, the courtier who'd lost his bet, had a little statue made of him on his knee, presenting a document to the empress on which there were lines by the court poet Metastasio, and you have them in Italian on the screen. And what they mean is, I've lost. The imperial daughter has condemned me to pay, because he's lost his bet. But if it's true that she looks like you, well, then everybody will have won in the end. So that's the birth of Maria Antonia, as she then was, in, I think, the happiest possible light. I'd add also that there is a trace of her birth in the diary of one of the members of Maria Theresa's close circles, in which she is described as, believe it or not, small but perfectly formed in German, but there we are. So she's born into this large family, a large family in which there are several deaths over the years. I said there were 16 children, 10 of them will reach adulthood, 6 girls and 4 boys. And this, on the left, you have a picture from the collections, which many of you will know, is the imperial family. And I've given you 2 pictures. Why? Because one is the one on the left in the small frame is a large miniature, which you can see upstairs, and the other is one of the larger variants, which is at Schönbrunn. What happened is that Maria Theresa loves pictures of the family, and she has the family painted as a family, as well as having members of the family painted as individuals. And this is one of the instances where the court painter, who's not the most gifted of painters, Matens, paints the imperial family. There's in a sense, there's the framing he likes, there's this sort of terrace in the background, the emperor on one side, the empress on the other side, the children in the middle. And when more children come along, they're just sort of painted into the picture. And it means that they're not really individualized, but you do get the sense of a group. And one of the exciting things about the miniature in the Wallace collection is that it is believed to have been one of the first versions to include Maria Antonia, the future Marie-Antoinette. And she's supposed to be the little girl at the front in the silvery grey dress. And one of the things that you'll notice is that, she's a child before the last. There are children who look younger. That's part of the adding in bit. The relative ages aren't always respected, and it's not always very easy to work out who's who in these pictures. Now, there are different sizes, I said, and that's because the pictures serve different functions. Some of them are on show in Maria Theresa's public apartment, so people can come along and say, what a wonderful large family you have. Others are given, for instance, as gifts to people who have served the court well, diplomats, for instance, or people who come on state visits. But they're also ways of advertising. This is a healthy family. This is a family which has power because the children represent a form of power. since the children will then be used by Maria Theresa to create an extraordinary network throughout Europe. And one of the things you might notice on both versions is that the boys are crowded around their mother and the girls are crowded around their father. And that's partly because the person who really wore the trousers in the Habsburg-Lorraine household was Maria Theresa. She was herself the daughter of the emperor, and she was the one who was queen, or it was sometimes said king of Hungary, in her own right. So this is a picture which is not about showing individual identities. Now, I said Maria Theresa loves pictures, including pictures of her family, and here are examples of very beautiful pictures by one of her favorite artists, and he's a very good artist, Lyotard. Lyotard, who painted most of the children on a visit in 1762. And you have the two youngest daughters to survive, Maria Carolina and Marie-Antoinette here. And I've simply put in the middle an example of a shuttle from the Wallace collection. The children are all represented doing something which was supposed to be indicative of their interests or talents. And so you have one of them, for instance, who's singing, one of them who's drawing fortifications. And the shuttle here is for something like tatting or knotting. So the type of aristocratic pursuit which was thought completely all right for an archduchess to practice. And if you haven't seen the shuttles like the one I've put on, which are up in the boudoir cabinet, I do invite you to go and have a look at them, because they're intricate and extraordinary objects. So they're functional, but they're also very, very beautiful. And one of the things they actually allowed you to do when you were an aristocratic woman was to show off your hands. And Marie-Antoinette is often described as having had the most beautiful hands of anybody who knew her. So this is two of the imperial children. Here's another indication of what happens during Maria Antonia's childhood in Vienna. The archduchesses were supposed to have social graces, and this is a not very good picture. It's a close-up of one part of a picture you may have seen if you've been to Schönbrunn. There's a whole series of pictures painted to celebrate the wedding of the heir to the throne, Archduke Joseph, and Isabella of Parma in 1760. And this is a concert in the Redoutensaal. And at the front, under the arrow, you can see in a sort of greyish blue dress is the youngest of the girls. So that's Maria Antonia. This is 1760. She's nearly 5 years old, and she's being made to sit in the front row at a concert and to behave beautifully. And that's one of the characteristics of her education. Lots of things are neglected, and then other things she's exposed to in a most unexpected way. And the nice thing is that the slightly stern-looking lady next to the little Archduchess, who you see in profile, was her governess, Countess von Brandis, who was very bad at teaching her anything, but was a delightful person with whom Marie-Antoinette corresponded even after she was sent to France. So at least there was a lot of affection there, even if there wasn't a lot of teaching. What we do know also about Marie-Antoinette's childhood is that the Habsburg children were not just asked to sit in audiences, they actually put on plays. There was a lot of performing for the family and for the intimate circles. As soon as it was somebody's birthday or feast day, for instance, then the children would practice songs or recite poems. There were little operas written for them, very often with librettists like Metastasio and conductors like Gluck. So it's very, very high quality, and that's encouraged. And this is a picture of Maria Antonia dancing at a performance in honor of Joseph's second marriage, where she's nearly 10. And it's a picture Marie-Antoinette herself loved, because she asked her mother to have a copy of it made so that she could hang it herself in Trianon. So this really does connect with the happiness of her childhood in Vienna, where she had the best, if her governess didn't teach her very much in terms of intellectual pursuits, she had the best teachers for music or for dance Novaire, for instance. And Marie-Antoinette's graceful demeanor is commented on throughout her life. And some of you will know the very famous passage by Burke in 1790 in his reflections on the revolution in France, where he talks about her almost gliding along the floor. And a lot of that, I think, can be put down to the fact that she had had very good deportment lessons. She was close to Maria Carolina, the other sister whom I showed you earlier on, and they were split up by their mother because they were sort of a little team, they were a little lobby together, and Maria Theresa thought they were a bad influence on each other. And when they were split up, this was very disadvantageous for Marie-Antoinette because she was held down with the babies, whereas Maria Carolina, who's known as Charlotte in the family, was taught an awful lot more than her. And Charlotte, Maria Carolina, would be sent to marry Ferdinand, the King of Naples, and was seen very much by Maria Theresa as a potential role model for Marie-Antoinette. And what I've given on the right of the picture is a little tiny holy image. The Italians call them santini. You'll have seen them if you've been around churches on the continent, in particular Catholic churches. There are often little pictures of saints with a prayer on the back or something like that. And you take them and you're supposed to recite the prayer on the back, or you take them just to remind you and to elevate your soul. Well, shortly before Maria Antonia is packed off to France to marry the future king of France, she takes a whole load of these little pictures and she writes messages to all those who have been close to her in Austria. And this is clearly something which her mother encourages, because I've found traces of ones written by some of her other sisters who've been sent away before her. But it does tell us several things, does this picture. One is that she doesn't like writing very much. She keeps the messages as short as possible when she's little. She's writing it when she's 14. She's clearly not a great intellectual. The Latin words at the top, auspice Deo, mean with the help of the Lord, with the help of God, something her mother often writes too. And Marie-Antoinette is brought up with the idea that she enjoys an elevated status in the world through God's will, that this is something God-given and which nothing should change. The Habsburgs feel that their exalted position is in a sense due to them. And the little note here is one of the ones Marie-Antoinette wrote not to a member of the nobility, but to someone who was high up in her sort of serving staff, one of the ladies in waiting she had. And she writes that she'll always be grateful for what this lady called Durieux has done for her. And it's quite characteristic. It's something that we can see here. Marie-Antoinette is very generous, and she's grateful and graceful to others. And we see a lot of occurrences of that throughout her life. So I think that's an early indication of something. She's destined to be the bride of the heir to the French throne, known as the Dauphin, as many of you will know. And when the decision is made, Maria Theresa is delighted, because this is the best prize she could have for one of her daughters, to know that she will be the future Queen of France. And because it's a match organized between two monarchs, Maria Theresa, the mother of the bride-to-be, and Louis XV, the grandfather of the groom-to-be, the bride and groom have never met, and portraits are exchanged. So it's very much sort of, catalogue bride. It's, what does she look like? So a diplomat sent off, to make sure that that she doesn't have any visible deformity, that she's apparently not mad, and so on. And the marriage with the heir to the French throne is very important for diplomatic reasons for Marie-Antoinette, because Maria Theresa, because a year after Marie-Antoinette's birth in 1756, there was a realignment of political alliances on the European scale, and France sided with Austria. And consolidating this through marrying her daughters to people related to the French throne had therefore become important to Maria Theresa. So it's the culmination of her matrimonial strategy. And Maria Theresa is very, very pragmatic about marrying her daughters off, and she actually isn't particularly concerned about the reports she has back about her sons or sons-in-law, future sons-in-law. And there's a case, for instance, where she's told that the man one of her daughters is about to marry, is possibly, slightly mad. And she says, oh, well, she'll just have to do her duty to God. And, as long as she behaves gracefully, that's fine. She'll go to heaven after death and, all will be well. So she's, quite pragmatic and also quite cold in some ways. She's also quite cold when, for instance, a marriage has been arranged between one of her daughters and the future King of Naples. When one daughter dies, she says, oh, it doesn't matter, I've got another one. Actually, I've got several. Which one would you like? And it really, a bit like a dealer playing with cards. And when Maria Carolina goes off to marry the King of Naples, she's the third Archduchess to have been promised to him, because the other two have died in the meantime. But anyhow, let's get back to Marie-Antoinette, as she will be known, or Maria Antonia. The picture on the left is the one sent to France to the king to show him that his future granddaughter-in-law is actually quite a good acquisition. And if I were to say, how old is the girl in the picture on the left, having not told you who she was, I don't think you'd be saying 13. But she is 13. She looks ultra sophisticated. A French hairdresser has been sent for her to be, given a sort of a makeover, so she'll look like a perfect French bride. Her teeth have been straightened, although you can't see them there, and so on. And she's also been sent a French abbé to sort out her spoken French. You notice that her earlier note was in French. French is one of the court languages in Vienna. The abbé who is sent to sort out her French, knowledge of French history, etc., says, oh, I despair of this place. Everybody speaks 3 languages, which to me sounds rather ideal, but he thinks, no, you should only speak, very, very pure French. But Marie-Antoinette is sort of groomed to be the perfect bride for the French king. And on the right is another portrait of her at the same time. And as you'll see, she looks much plainer in the right-hand portrait. And it's probably a truer portrait. It's probably one that is less flattered, one that's made to look like her more than looking like the ideal of what she's expected to look like. And the portrait, which is painted, is actually presented to her future husband, and that's how, in a sense, they meet through the portraits. Now, the scene is imagined by Gauthier d'Agotty, one of the French artists around at the time. He's only 14, she's 13. When this is concluded. They're about to be married the next year. And this picture shows us the French court rather than the Austrian court, and the French ambassador is holding up the supposed portrait of Maria Antonia with the king's aunts near him, the king sitting down, the future bridegroom standing up, and his little sisters behind him. And what it does show is the entourage expecting young Maria Antonia when she gets to court. She's always going to be the Austrian bride for the French court. And some of you will know that she's referred to disparagingly quite often as l'Autrichienne, so the Austrian woman, which sounds almost like l'autre chienne, that bitch. And so there's a lot of playing around with that. And Marie-Antoinette doesn't realize when she arrives in Versailles that there is this strong anti-Austrian sentiment, which is the built-up idea of the fact that the Austrians are hereditary enemies on the one hand, and the fact that there are other parties which have alliances, for instance, with Saxony and so on, and would have been quite glad for it to have been a princess from Saxony on the throne. So this is where Maria Antonia will end up. And here you have pictures from the collection of the grandfather, Louis XV, and of the husband, the future Louis XVI. And just a couple of things about these pictures which you may well know. So Louis XV, the grandfather, is widowed, but he also has a very much younger mistress, Madame du Barry. And this is very, very shocking for young Marie-Antoinette, who's been brought up in a very Catholic almost prudish environment, and she finds it hard to handle. And there are exchanges of letters between her and her mother, with her mother saying, you know, you have to talk to this woman, you know, because the king wants you to do it. And she's saying, but it's quite scandalous that he should be carrying on with this sort of young thing, and so on. So she's quite prudish and quite alarmed by what she sees, and for which she hasn't been prepared. And as to young Louis XVI on the right, that's a miniature which is in the collection. They look like diamonds. Sometimes they are diamonds. These ones, unfortunately, are paste gems. But they show also one of the ways that portraits were used in the 18th century. You would often wear a jewel with a portrait. So to show that the Queen could wear a portrait of her husband, for instance, but you could also show it off if you were a courtier and you had, you know, sort of, you'd helped the state in some way and been given some form of medal or some form of award. But it is very much an ostentatious sort of piece of jewellery in more ways than one. And I'd just like to take one quotation which tells us what Marie-Antoinette was like when she reached Versailles. And I've chosen to draw it from the memoirs of someone who was one of the page boys at court. And this is what Tilly writes about her. You have the translation in English on the screen. Elle avait ce qui vaut mieux sur le trône que la beauté parfaite, la figure d'une reine de France, même dans les instants où elle cherchait le plus à ne paraître qu'une jolie femme. On n'a jamais fait la révérence avec tant de grâce, saluant 10 personnes en se ployant une seule fois et donnant de la tête et du regard à chacun ce qui lui revenait. And that's something which recurs. Everybody says, you know, from the start, she actually does look like a queen. So she fits into the role in that respect very well. And here is the first portrait of her painted when she'd got to Versailles. And this is in a sense intended to serve for other portraits so that she can then be sort of dressed up with more jewelry and so on. So it's intended to be facially accurate. And it shows that she's plainer than in some of her official portraits. And it suggests something of, you know, the awkwardness of her situation, I think, when she arrives. Once again, you know, she's a teenager. She's not really wanted by her husband, who has no interest in having a wife at that stage. She has no mother-in-law. There's no proper female role model. And she's at once quite bored, not knowing what to do with herself, and not mistress of her own time, because she's always been called off to do this, to do that, you know, sort of to go to mass, to, you know, go and see the king, or told that, yes, tomorrow we're going to be going to Marly, which is one of the other chateaux, you know, we're leaving Versailles and so on. So obviously all of this will change, particularly after the death of her husband's grandfather, Louis XV, in 1774, when he'll mount the throne. But that's a sort of slightly unhappy, I think, few years in Versailles. While she's still Dauphine, she has to find her place. And I mentioned that the early note suggested that she was, you know, graceful and thoughtful when people were generous to her and so on. And there are several instances of her generosity which are reported. So obviously, it's very good spin, if you can say, isn't she generous and thoughtful? And this is an example of the way in which, you know, spin would happen. Engravings would be made of a case in which it could be said, she behaved with, you know, sort of great generosity. This is someone who was, you know, nearly hit by the carriage she was in, and she said, you know, let me look after them, and so on. But there are also things which don't make it into the engravings and into the newspapers. She, for instance, her marriage is not consummated for the first 7 years, and she brings up or funds several children, you know, children who are, you know, children of peasants whom she's come across and this sort of thing. So she goes on doing that, you know, throughout, you know, up till the revolution. She's funding some of these people. So she is naturally, it seems, someone who's sort of inclined to do good when she can. She's also, I think, in many ways, and this is something we'll all recognise as one of her current sort of values, she's also the queen of taste. She remains the queen of taste. So first of all, she's the queen, and just a note about that. I said Louis XV dies in 1774. This means that at the age of 18, Marie-Antoinette is queen consort. And She's queen consort, which means she has no power. She has no official role. The only thing which is desired of her is for her to supply an heir for the French throne, and preferably, one or two spares as well. And this is a very good, I think, illustration of the fact. It's the coronation of Louis XVI, so coronation in Reims Cathedral, when he is consecrated with holy oil, which is said to have been brought down to earth by the Holy Spirit. He is king by divine right, etc. And if you look at the picture, where is Marie-Antoinette? The king's right in the middle, there are bishops, there are military men, etc. Well, Marie-Antoinette is sitting on one of the balconies. She's a spectator, she's sidelined, she has absolutely no power. And that's one of the things which I think will affect people's perception of her more generally. She's not supposed to be a political figure. The cover slide on Show Upstairs shows us what she was like when she became queen. So this is a profile and there's a companion medallion of her husband Louis XVI, possibly by Antoine-François Lebrun. And it's a very beautiful portrait, I think, and it's one of the ones, again, which would have been made as a way of circulating a particular image of the royal couple. And the fact that they're both, they go together, there's a pair, it very much suggests, this is the new reign, the new and happy reign, and here are our young monarchs. And that's very much what is thought of at the time. But Marie-Antoinette, as you can see here, has a very complicated and fashionable hairdo, even if she has a fairly sort of standard profile. You can't see much of her dress. And she will very much be someone associated with fashion. And I think one of the questions which it's worth asking about her is she a fashion victim or is she a fashion leader? Well, she's very much a fashion leader in many ways. She's the most portrayed woman of her time. And this is true, throughout, including, and you've got on the extreme left, when she decides to retire to a calmer life, to spend more time in her small palace in Trianon, in the grounds of the Château de Versailles. And that's a stage where she thinks, actually, I don't really want to be in the limelight. I don't want to be buying expensive dresses and jewelry all the time. I want to spend more time with my children and so on. And it's interpreted by the French public as, she must be doing something secretive, and why is she hiding from us, and so on. So it's problematic. And in the same way, the dress on the left, the very famous picture on the left by Vigée Lebrun, which she liked, Marie-Antoinette liked this picture a lot, and she sends it to one of her friends, Louise von Hesse-Darmstadt. She's wearing a simple muslin dress. Well, it's not simple in that there are layers and layers of it, and it's very hard to make, etc. But it's not what was expected of a queen. Nothing on that picture says, this is the queen. There are no crowns. She's not wearing an order of nobility. There are no illusions. She's not got one of the brooches with a picture of her husband on or anything like that. This is just a picture of a beautiful woman. And that was one of the ways in which fashion partly caused her downfall. She was seen as wanting to be a beautiful woman and not remaining, in a sense, queenly enough. But it has to be said that her interest in fashion accompanied the birth of haute couture, and that she remains a reference for haute couture. She was admired, she was imitated, but she was also criticized, seen as spending far too much, as being frivolous, and so on. But she remains one of the most recognizable figures in history. There are lots of people who have no idea who Marie-Antoinette really is, but who will identify the pictures of her. I've just given you as examples, an advertisement for coffee. Then, just after, when we were just coming out of lockdown, Versailles saying, sort of buy local, using a portrait of her. And then an example from a recent Moschino haute couture collection. I could have taken examples from lots of other couturiers. So she at once was a victim of her taste for fashion, but very much, I think, a fashion leader. One of her other strengths, which most people don't know about, is that she was a very good musician. I mentioned that at court in Vienna as a child, there'd been a lot of music with people like Gluck around. She is instrumental in having Gluck brought over to France, and that changes the course of French opera forever. She also protects Italian composers like Piccini and Sacchini. So she has, pretty major effect on French music. And you've got a picture of her here sitting at her toilette with people coming in to try and make her buy plumes and lace and presenting petitions, wanting to paint her portrait, etc. But also she has her harp, and it's going to be a solace for her to be able to play her harp when she's initially in Versailles and doesn't know what to do with herself. And there's a lovely letter where her mother sends her some harp music and says, well, I don't know if you'll manage this. And she writes back and says, it was just so easy. I've been practicing hard and it was just so easy. And she clearly loves music, and she practices music in different ways throughout her life. And she's indeed said to be the composer of a couple of airs, including this one, C'est mon ami, and you can hear it online. So if you type C'est mon ami into Google, you will get YouTube versions of it. She may or may not have written it. Marie-Antoinette loves light music. She loves light music also as an actress, and one of the things she will do is continue to sing and act like she did when she was little, but do it in a very small theatre she has built in Trianon. Now, the French public aren't the Austrian public, and the French public think this is completely appalling. She's behaving like an actress in the worst possible sense of the term. She is putting herself on show in public, even though nobody gets to see the plays because they're only put on for the people in court. But it's interpreted very much as a departure from what she should be doing and as debasing her role as queen. But it stems, I think, initially from her taste for music. The other thing I think it stems from is the fact that she's actually a very good friend. She doesn't want to have her friendships dictated by who's important, sort of who was born into a wealthy family and so on. She likes people as individual. And I've given you the example of a couple of pictures from the collection of people who were close to Marie-Antoinette. And one is the Princesse de Lamballe, who will be executed dreadfully and have her head paraded around on a stake before Marie-Antoinette's windows when Marie-Antoinette is in prison. And on the right, the Prince de Ligne. The Princesse de Lamballe is a very interesting character. She enjoys collecting fashionable, sentimental English engravings, and Sarah Grant at the Victoria and Albert Museum has done a lot of work on that. And Marie-Antoinette, too, has this taste, for instance, for these pictures. And she's one of the cases of female collectors whose role is being revalued, re-estimated currently. And one of the things Marie-Antoinette loves collecting is anything made of Japanese lacquer. And that's a taste she's inherited from her mother. And she'll inherit a whole series of lacquer objects from Maria Theresa. So Marie-Antoinette has a lot of taste. She's interested in objects. She buys this extraordinary thing which is in the Wallace collection. I think it's probably the most extraordinary object in the collection, which is not lacking in extraordinary objects. It's for sort of burning incense. She bought it via an agent at an auction, and it was the highest price object in a very, very high quality sale. It's incredibly beautiful work. You can see how finely chiseled it is. It's a luxury object for a luxury function. And I think it very much speaks to the fact that Marie-Antoinette loves beautiful workmanship. She's really on the lookout for something which is aesthetically satisfying. And I think this is a good example. And she uses her little palace, the Petit Trianon, in the grounds of Versailles, as a place where she can, even more than she had done already in the other castles owned by the King of France, develop her own taste. She wants beauty inside and out. And so, for instance, she has the gardens landscaped at great expense to look natural. She also, and this is where I think the Wallace has an invaluable collection, has very assured taste in terms of furniture. She orders lots and lots of things for the different chateaux, and many of the pieces of furniture are absolutely spectacular, like this chest of drawers by one of her favorite cabinet makers, Riesner. And I have to say, I owe a lot of what I know about Marie-Antoinette and furniture to Helen Jacobson, who used to be keeper of curator of furniture here. So if you go up and look at this, I mean, it's extraordinary as it is as a piece of furniture, but the marble top isn't the one it would have had. And more importantly, the colours of the wood have faded. What we don't realise is just how original, how bright, how colourful it would have been. There's a close-up of the central trophy, which is sort of pastoral trophy, and that would have been in colour, or at least much, much more colourful. And it matched the pattern on the silk which Marie-Antoinette had woven for the wall hangings and curtains. So this really is about, proper decorating programs. It's not simply, I need a new chest of drawers. And she changes furniture, she changes curtains, etc. And one of the things which recurs is her interest in the pastoral as an aesthetic. She likes pastoral scenes. She likes, pastoral motifs for furniture and so on. And here's another instance of Marie-Antoinette's taste as preserved here in the Wallace collection, an encoignure, a corner cupboard, with here the typical white marble top. And you see, again, the extraordinary sumptuous quality of the gilt bronze mount. And again, the central trophy, it's again pastoral. It has a pair of doves perched on a tambourine, has a basket of flowers on a ribbon, and so on. And very, very characteristic of the things which Marie-Antoinette absolutely loved. And one of the things which I think is worth noting here is that it's a piece of furniture which was made for one of the royal chateaux, Marly, but Marie-Antoinette liked it so much that she said, actually, no, I want it in Versailles because I spend more time in Versailles. So there really is this very active taste, and clearly furniture is a passion of hers. And I've just put a little former tweet from the Wallace collection showing the way in which there's been an attempt in some aspects to take Marie-Antoinette's taste into account in some of the decoration. Another thing I think for which Marie-Antoinette was extremely gifted is that she was a very loving mother. So motherhood came late. I said for 7 years the marriage wasn't consummated. Then the couple had a first daughter, Marie-Thérèse Charlotte, and then at last, in 1781, an heir to the throne, so the Dauphin. And this is, obviously a completely imaginary scene of the birth of the Dauphin. But what I've also put is, again, an object from the collection, which celebrates the fact that the heir to the throne of France is called the Dauphin, or Dolphin. You can see the dolphins here, and you can't quite make out, I expect, the fleur-de-lis patterns on the base of the candlestick. It's another indication, I think, at once of Marie-Antoinette's interest in what was going on and desire to celebrate the birth of her child. Marie-Antoinette had 4 children. One of them died as a baby, the little one. And her reputation had suffered for many reasons. I mentioned that she'd always been seen as Austrian and representative of the hereditary enemy. She was also seen as profligate. She was blamed for the bankruptcy of France, although that had rather a lot more to do with funding the American Revolution, but there we are. And the sort of equivalent of spin doctors at the time thought that motherhood might be a way of improving her image. And so the large Vigée Lebrun portrait is one which was ordered because it was an attempt to show her as the perfect mother and doing what the French throne wanted her to do. And I've put the Rubens up there just to show you it's the type of portrait which is within an iconographic tradition here. And what you may notice in this particular picture is that in the background, there's a piece of furniture. It's a piece of furniture called the serre bijou. So it's the jewelry box, as it were. It's a huge piece of furniture, a strong box for Marie-Antoinette's jewelry. But it's back in the shadows because this is an allusion to a story from Roman times that Cornelia, mother of the Gracchi, presented her sons and said, "These are my jewels. I have no need of jewels. My children are my jewels." And this is the idea here. The children are in the front. They're what matters to me, not my jewels, which are relegated in the back. I'm going to talk now briefly about Marie-Antoinette as something you're probably not expecting, and that is in many ways an astute politician. Now, of course, spoiler alert, it ends badly with her head being chopped off. So you might be thinking that's not very astute. That's perfectly true. The Bastille is stormed on the 14th of January 1789, as I'm sure you all know. Pressure mounts on the monarchy and they're forced to move to Paris in October 1789. And they then live in the Tuileries Palace under surveillance, but keeping up a semblance of court life. And at that stage, the king is extremely depressed. Now, two things have happened. One is that their elder son has died in 1789. And the other is that the king is being asked to play a part which he doesn't feel corresponds to what he sees as the function of a French monarch. And Marie-Antoinette is going to show that she is capable of being a redoubtable political agent. We know this because there are various letters preserved. And the letters do things like, for instance, so you think of Marie-Antoinette as an airhead possibly, well, discussing how we're going to get money abroad and, how we're going to get troops on the border so there could possibly be an invasion and so on. She is very much someone who gets involved in using a network and trying to mobilize the network. Another thing she does is that she writes letters in code. So some of them are with, sort of lemon juice, like you probably used when you were children to pretend, play spies, write in lemon juice and then hold it to the flame of a candle and, ooh, you can see the message. So that sort of thing and other forms of invisible ink. There's a lot of coding, cryptography going on too. So she's there, writing series of numbers to hide the fact that she's talking about where troops should be stationed, for instance. And she sometimes ends up having to write sort of public letters because she knows that the letters can be seized by the revolutionaries, and then writing secret ones to contradict them. And that's an example here of a letter which is contradicting another one. So all of this shows that she could act decisively. It was to no avail, since the royal family was sent to the Temple prison in 1792 and really locked up then. On the 21st of January 1793, the king was executed after a trial. Marie-Antoinette was subsequently separated from her children, sent to the conciergerie and executed on October the 16th, 1793. Now, it could all have ended there. She, after all, was only the wife of the king and nothing more in political terms, as I mentioned. Well, it didn't end there. And here are a couple of examples from the collection of the fact that almost immediately after her death, Marie-Antoinette becomes a model of a whole series of different things. She's seen as a martyr queen. She's seen as, the queen of fashion, and so on. And if you think of Empress Eugénie, for instance, in the middle of the 19th century, she tries to create an identity for herself, partly through imitating references to Marie-Antoinette. And I think all of this has to be taken into account when we consider what Marie-Antoinette is nowadays. The fact that she remains, I think it's fair to say, probably the most famous woman in the history of France, the only other contender being Joan of Arc, and certainly one of the most famous queens in history. And so here, for better or for worse, is an illustration of the fact that Marie-Antoinette is never out of fashion. These are all really recent things, which, I've plucked off internet. So exhibitions like there's an upcoming one at the V&A on Marie-Antoinette and style. That's the sort of serious side. There are lots of films, some of them which are or are not historically accurate. There's also the use of Marie-Antoinette to discredit political figures. Emmanuel Macron here at the bottom. You may recall also the scene outside the Conciergerie in the Olympic Games opening ceremony. But I'm always struck by one thing, and that is another woman, Germaine de Staël, writing shortly before Marie-Antoinette was executed, and warning the revolutionaries and saying, you really ought not to execute her. And she gives various reasons. She says, you can show yourselves to be magnanimous, and that's the best thing you can do politically, to be magnanimous, which is a good argument in itself. And she says, and also, if you immolate her, she uses the word immolate, if you immolate her, you will consecrate her forever. And I think that's what happened. I think the execution, which is seen in some ways as gratuitous for this person who officially had no political role, has turned her very much into a cultural and aesthetic icon second to none in French history. Thank you.